In the vastness of space, beyond the reach of Earth's grasp, the Galactic Union reigned supreme. It was a civilization built on the cold, unyielding control of silence. Words were scarce, only spoken when necessary, each syllable a deliberate act. Expression was not just feared, it was forbidden. The mere thought of disagreement, of individuality, was a threat to the fragile peace. Within this universe, control was absolute, and emotion was a luxury no one could afford. The worlds under the Union's dominion floated like distant stars in a void of regulated tranquility. Here, life moved with precise order. No outbursts, no anger, no joy, just the monotonous hum of unity. The citizens of the Union followed their duties, unchallenged, their every action controlled by rules that stifled freedom. Eli Tran, the sole human among them, was an anomaly. Earth's chaotic, loud culture clashed violently with the Union's austere silence. Yet, in this unnatural stillness, Eli found himself both an outsider and a source of fascination. To them, humanity's inability to control expression was not just a flaw, it was a dangerous disruption. Still, the Union tolerated him, knowing his presence was essential for the continued study of Earth's unrefined ways. The silence pressed down on everything. It was suffocating, yet powerful. No one dared question it. Eli Tran sat quietly in the center of the alien embassy, a place where his presence felt like a whirlwind in a room full of statues. His role was simple. He was Earth's ambassador in a galaxy that had never fully understood humanity. He was an oddity. Earth's chaotic, loud culture, once laughed at by the Union, now served as the bridge between two worlds. His appearance alone marked him as different. His dark, messy hair was a sign of Earth's defiance against order. His eyes, expressive, always darting around the room, never still, spoke of a deep, unfiltered curiosity, something the Union found unnerving. To them, his every move, every gesture was unrefined, dangerously emotional. Eli had been told countless times that silence was a virtue. But how could it be a virtue when it drowned out truth? Here, in this alien world, he was mocked but tolerated. His words were simple, honest. They fell upon ears that seemed both curious and repelled. Eli's earthling personality, the one that laughed too loud, spoke too much, and never feared showing emotion, was a stark contrast to the robotic composure of his alien hosts. And yet his quiet presence felt like a storm, waiting to break. The first few weeks in the Galactic Union were a study in discomfort for Eli. Everywhere he went, there was a chill in the air, an unspoken fear that ran deeper than the strange and silent language of his hosts. His attempts to converse, to ask why or how, were met with awkward pauses and subtle glances, eyes shifting away, unwilling to engage in anything that might break the invisible wall of control. In their culture, asking why was a dangerous question. The very thought of questioning the established order had been eradicated centuries ago. Any question that broke the silence was an insult to their perfectly measured society. To Eli, this was suffocating. To his hosts, it was life-saving. Each encounter was like navigating a minefield. A conversation could shift from friendly banter to icy silence in the blink of an eye if the wrong word was spoken. The casual tone of his questions felt like a blasphemy. There was no room for curiosity here, no room for the messy, unruly process of discovery. Just rules, just silence. Eli learned quickly. No matter how badly he wanted to push boundaries, no matter how curious he was, there was no room for freedom of thought here. There were only words in chains.
Eli's job was to conduct cultural seminars, teaching the Union's citizens about Earth's history, art, and language. He spoke openly, honestly, with every word laced with emotion. Yet when he looked out over the sea of alien faces, he was met with stillness. No nods of agreement, no laughter at jokes, no gestures. only the empty silence that seemed to suffocate every room he entered. His presentations, which should have been filled with questions and lively debate, were instead met with a quiet politeness. His alien audience stared at him, expressions unreadable, lips sealed. It wasn't that they were uninterested, it was that they feared even the hint of a question. There was no room for disruption, for disturbance. The Union's people had been trained from birth to never interrupt, never react. The stillness was overwhelming. Eli found himself speaking louder, more passionately, as if to fill the silence. But he knew the truth. His words were like echoes in a hollow room, bouncing off walls that refused to engage. No one ever asked a question. No one ever disagreed. It was perfect order. And yet, beneath that order, Eli could sense a deep unease, a repressed longing for something more. It wasn't until weeks later that Eli truly began to notice it. The subtle way his alien students flinched at certain words, the way they avoided eye contact when discussing certain topics. Freedom, choice, and even emotion were met with the same unnatural silence. At first, he thought it was mere coincidence, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. His students were terrified. They spoke in hushed tones, never daring to look him in the eye when discussing anything too personal. Even the most benign words seemed to carry the weight of years of suppression. Eli began to wonder what lay beneath the surface of their perfect composure. What were they hiding? They were afraid of truth. They were afraid of what could happen if they dared to express themselves, to feel anything. The Union's law of silence wasn't just about control. It was about survival. But survival from what? The emptiness around him grew more palpable with every passing day. These people, these beings who seemed so perfect, were broken inside. He could see it now. The fear of expression was not born of nature, but of force. It came unexpectedly, in the middle of a routine Q&A session. A student, an alien whose species had always been quiet and composed, raised their hand trembling. Eli's eyes locked onto the pale, shaking form, a rare display of vulnerability. "What does the word freedom mean to humans?" the student asked, their voice barely audible, as though the question itself was dangerous. The entire room went still, as if the very air held its breath waiting for Eli's response. Eli hesitated. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just a question. It was an invitation to something larger, something rebellious, a crack in the wall. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, then answered softly, his voice carrying the weight of every human struggle, every war fought for freedom. Freedom is the ability to choose, to risk, to speak without fear. It's the belief that you are not defined by what others make of you, but by what you choose to become. We fight for it because it means we are alive. The words hung in the air, heavy with the truth of their meaning. The student nodded, their eyes wide with something Eli couldn't quite place. Hope? Fear? And then for the first time in the seminar, someone in the back of the room shifted uncomfortably in their seat.
Eli's words reverberated through the room, shaking something deep within the hearts of his listeners. What had begun as a simple answer had turned into something far more powerful, a spark. His definition of freedom, though simple, struck at the very core of the Union's existence. It was a concept they had not dared to touch. The room was silent, but this time it was different. The air was thick with emotion, and there, in that moment, Eli understood. His words had not fallen on deaf ears. They had ignited something deep within the people of the Galactic Union. His answer had done more than describe a concept. It had awakened a longing, an awareness of something they had buried for too long. Across the stars, the idea of freedom began to spread. A whispered hope passed from one alien to another, and then to another. Eli had unknowingly sparked a fire that would not be extinguished. After the seminar, Eli walked the corridors, the whispers of his words trailing behind him like a shadow. The Union was watching him more closely now. There were eyes that avoided him, but there were also eyes that followed him with a new kind of intensity. Some aliens looked away, but others seemed different, more awake, more curious. Fear and awe mingled in their gaze. They had heard the word freedom, and now it burned beneath their skin. They didn't know what it meant yet, but they felt its weight. They knew something had changed. Eli had sparked something dangerous and powerful. But what would it become? Would it be crushed under the weight of the Union's silence? Or would it grow into something unstoppable? The quiet had been broken. The question had been asked. And the fire had begun. The air in the lecture hall was suffocatingly silent, save for the soft hum of the ancient air recyclers overhead. Alien faces, cold and unblinking, stared ahead at Eli Tron, Earth's representative in a galaxy that saw no need for words. The Galactic Union had long ruled with an iron fist, a civilization bound by the tyranny of silence. Here, expression was a privilege, not a right, and emotions were to be hidden under layers of regulation. Eli stood at the front, a stark contrast to the stillness of the room, his voice steady but raw with the weight of his words. He had been asked a simple question, one that struck to the core of humanity's essence. What does the word freedom mean to humans? A question that no one in this galaxy dared ask aloud, let alone consider answering. But Eli wasn't like them. Earth was loud, chaotic, defiant, and that made him, in their eyes, dangerous. His answer was an eruption. Freedom, Eli's voice cut through the stillness, is the right to choose, the right to fall and rise. It is to speak without fear of consequence, to love without shame, and to break without being shattered. His words were raw, visceral, the truth of human experience laid bare. We are not perfect, far from it, but we are free because we dare to choose. We dare to live with all the risk and mess that life brings. That's freedom. The room went dead silent. There was no applause, no gasps of awe, just the weight of Eli's words hanging in the air, a subtle rebellion in their simplicity. His definition of freedom, unsanitized, untamed, had set off a ripple in the galaxy, a ripple no one could yet understand.
Eli had no idea what he had just started. The lecture continued as planned, the alien students watching him with their unreadable gazes. Yet beneath their polished exteriors, something had changed. Somewhere, in the shadows, a figure had moved. The lecture was over, but the effect of his words had only begun to spread. A recording device, hidden in the folds of a student's clothing, had captured Eli's impassioned speech. Unseen, undetected, it broadcasted into encrypted data streams slipping past the ever-watchful eyes of the Union's authorities. The moment was captured, shared, and dissected in the hidden corners of the galaxy. What Eli had seen as a harmless moment of expression had become an act of defiance, an act that would change everything. The message spread quickly. Data peddlers, black market dealers, and rogue networks had already seized the opportunity. A word that had been silenced for centuries, the word freedom, was now being whispered across the galaxy. Only in hidden channels, of course, where no one could hear, but even whispers were enough. The data stream carried Eli's words, filtered through the dark web of the Galactic Union's forbidden zones, to colonies scattered across the galaxy. In the quiet corners of high-security sectors,
In hidden chambers beneath the towering spires of elite cities, the message began to take root. At first, it was just a ripple. One alien, then another, then a few more, huddling in dimly lit rooms watching the recording. Their eyes flickered with a mixture of awe and fear as Eli's passionate words echoed in their minds. Freedom. They repeated it in hushed tones, the forbidden phrase almost tasting like rebellion. The idea of choice, of the right to speak, to act, things they had never considered began to grow in their hearts. Some mimicked Eli's words in secret conversations, others quietly drew the word freedom on walls in places where no one would see. The idea that had been buried for eons was now being planted in the minds of those who had never dared to dream of it. They were afraid, yes, but something deeper had stirred within them. For the first time, they wondered, what if? The Galactic Union did not take kindly to the spreading of insurrection. The system they had worked so hard to build, one that ran on silence, on control, on absolute power, was cracking, and they would not allow it to break. Eli Tran, Earth's representative and unwitting instigator of this viral idea, was arrested without warning. There would be no trial, no questions asked. The Union didn't need to punish him with violence, they would erase him, his memory, his very existence from the galaxy. He was dragged away in the dead of night, his once loud voice now reduced to silence. The authorities had a system in place for moments like this, a place for dissidents, for those who questioned too much. They didn't need to torture him or make an example of him, they would simply erase him. His words would disappear into the void, and with them, his legacy. But the galaxy was already changing. It was too late to put the word back in its cage. Eli awoke in a cold, sterile holding cell, stripped of all connection to the world he had once known. His mind raced as he sat against the wall, his thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion and realization. The Union had captured him, yes, but his words were already out there. He had sparked something that they could never contain. He realized with chilling clarity that he hadn't just spoken of freedom, he had ignited a question that could not be unasked. The Union's suffocating grip on expression had been challenged, and he had done it without a single weapon, without a single act of violence. Just words. And now, in this cold, isolated cell, Eli wondered if the galaxy would ever truly understand the power of what he had said. Back in the heart of the Union's most controlled sectors, things were changing. Quietly, discreetly, students and workers alike began to speak the words that had once been silenced. They whispered in dark hallways, in maintenance tunnels, in factories where their hands could do the work, but their hearts now beat with a new sense of purpose. Eli's message had not only spurred curiosity, it had ignited something deeper: hope. The word freedom began to appear in places it had never been seen before, etched into the sides of pipes, hidden under desks, whispered behind closed doors. Aliens who had long adhered to the rules of silence began to ask questions. They did not yet understand what they were asking, but the seed had been planted. They wanted to know more, wanted to know why they had never asked these questions before. It was the beginning of something they had never allowed themselves to imagine. In the distant corners of the galaxy, far beyond the reach of the Union's most powerful enforcement, the first protests began to form. At first it was small, a few voices, muffled, hidden, but defiant nonetheless. The young, the silenced, the forgotten, all of them had heard Eli's words. They had felt the stirring of something more inside them. They had heard the call for freedom, and it resonated within their souls. Some spoke out openly, demanding the release of Eli Tran. Others did not care for his release, but only for the right to speak freely, to challenge the suffocating silence that had defined their lives. It was not yet an organized movement, but the sparks of rebellion were there. Small protests began to break out across fringe colonies, quiet but insistent. The Union reacted swiftly. Earth-related content was scrubbed from all networks. No communication was allowed with Earth. The word freedom was scrubbed from the galactic lexicon, its very mention forbidden. The great silence deepened, but it was too late. The idea was loose. Whispers had turned into questions, and questions into small rebellions. The Union's iron grip on silence was slipping, and it was slipping because of one human's words. And the galaxy, once united in its fear and silence, was now irrevocably changed. Eli sits on the cold, hard floor of his high-security prison cell, his back pressed against the steel wall. Surveillance drums hum in the corners, their glowing eyes unblinking, watching every movement, every thought. The room is empty save for the faint hum of machinery that masks the silence. The walls, impenetrable and sterile, feel more like a tomb than a holding cell. Eli's mind is a storm. The word freedom keeps echoing in his thoughts. But even here, in the heart of the Union's fortress, he knows that speaking it is a death sentence. The words from his speech still haunt him. The raw truth of it all, an idea that shouldn't have been spoken, yet now can't be unsaid. He clenches his fists in the darkness, feeling the chains of his imprisonment tighten not just around his wrists, but around his very spirit. The surveillance drones glide over him, their sensors recording every move, every thought. But Eli, defiant and driven, has begun to see through their illusion of control. The walls, the cameras, the silence. It's all an attempt to suffocate the spark of human curiosity and will. But he won't let it die.
Turning point. Eli stares into the cold metal of his cell door, and for the first time since his capture, a glimmer of defiance shines in his eyes. They can cage the body, but they can't cage the mind. Closure or transition. He stands, feeling the weight of his own thoughts pressing against the walls. He's been locked away, but his mind is free. And in that freedom, he begins to form a plan. It's time to let them know that no prison can truly silence him. Eli meets Sarah Call, a tall, angular alien with skin that shimmers like polished silver. Her eyes are tired, deep set with 1,000 years of unspoken history. They speak little at first, their only communication the quiet understanding that passes between prisoners, survivors of a system that erases everything it doesn't like. Suspense development. Sarah Call, once a historian for her people, had preserved forbidden knowledge, memories of past rebellions, ancient cultures, and truths about the Union that were never meant to see the light. She whispers in Eli's ear late at night, her voice barely audible. The Union isn't what you think. It isn't peace they seek to maintain, it's control. Turning point. Sarah Call pulls from her robes a small, tattered device, an old data recorder, its screen flickering with ancient, forbidden texts. These were the last whispers of my people. They didn't fade away like the Union said. They live in the archives of my mind. Closure or transition. Eli takes the device, his hands trembling as he realizes the depth of their shared cause. For the first time, he's not alone. Together, they will expose the truth. The prison, despite its sterile silence, becomes a place of quiet rebellion. Eli and Sarah Call meet in secret, in the corners of their cells where the cameras can't reach them. In hushed tones, they begin to piece together the horrifying truth about the Union. Suspense development. Through fragmented whispers and broken memories, Eli starts to understand. The Union wasn't formed to protect peace, it was formed to bury the past, to erase any trace of rebellion or dissent. They're not guarding peace, they're guarding ignorance, Sarah Call murmurs. Turning point. Sarah Call pulls from her robes a small, tattered device, an old data recorder, its screen flickering with ancient, forbidding texts. These were the last whispers of my people. They didn't fade away like the Union said. They live in the archives of my mind. Closure or transition. Eli takes the device, his hands trembling as he realizes the depth of their shared cause. For the first time, he's not alone. Together, they will expose the truth. On the fringes of the galaxy, beyond the watchful eyes of the Union's surveillance, the movement grows. Rebels in the outer colonies, disenfranchised, oppressed, forgotten, begin to rally around Eli's words. Suspense development. In hidden corners of the galaxy, on border planets and remote stations, rebels spray Eli's message, even if it's messy, on walls, in tunnels, and across the surfaces of abandoned ships. Fear spreads among Union leaders who realize that a new kind of rebellion is growing. It's not just against them, it's for something more. One rebel, a young woman named Juna, steps forward and challenges her people. What's the cost of silence? What's the cost of doing nothing? The walls of control are cracking. The movement is small, but it's spreading and it's growing stronger by the day.
Back on Earth, Eli's former team has gone underground. The Union has severed all official ties, but these renegades refuse to let Eli's voice be forgotten. They use forbidden channels, old outlawed networks, to send encrypted messages across the stars. They work tirelessly, translating Eli's speech into alien languages, knowing full well the risks they're taking. The Union Council is watching, but the people on the edge of the galaxy are listening. The Union team is fueling the fire, one message at a time. Commander Mara, the leader of the Earth team, looks at her crew. We're risking everything, but we can't stop now. If we do, they win. The transmissions continue, each message another small spark in the growing flame. The fight for freedom is no longer a human fight, it's an intergalactic one. On the edges of the galaxy, underground networks come alive. Smuggled tech and rogue AIs, once the tools of criminals and outcasts, are now the weapons of a revolution. Human engineers and alien linguists begin working together, using the old interstellar backdoors to amplify Eli's message. Code flows through the dark web like lifeblood. It's messy, chaotic, but it's working. A rogue AI, once deemed obsolete, joins the fight. It says, its digital voice crackling, "I was created to serve. Now I will help destroy the silence." The message spreads, and with it, the rebellion becomes unstoppable. The Union reacts quickly, as it always does, with brutal force. Surveillance increases. Cities are locked down. New laws are passed. Anyone caught speaking Eli's words is branded a criminal. The crackdown begins. Soldiers march down streets. Drones fly overhead. Fear grips the galaxy, but it's too late. The seed of rebellion is already planted. In a dimly lit alley on a distant world, a young rebel looks up at a sky filled with drones and whispers, "We've already won. They're afraid of us now." The Union can only try to control the chaos, but it's already slipping from their grasp. In the cold quiet of their prison cell, Eli and Saracal sit in silence. The walls press in on them, but in that silence, something new begins to stir. Saracal turns to Eli, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. One word started this. What word ends it? Eli's eyes flicker with something. Hope, defiance, the weight of knowing that the answer isn't just one word. It's a revolution. He doesn't speak, but his gaze meets hers. They know. The end is coming. And when it does, it will be a new beginning.
The dull, suffocating atmosphere of Zerthak's pen hung thick in the air as Saracal crouched low in the shadows of the surveillance room. Outside her cell, the distant hum of security drones filled the emptiness, their unblinking eyes scanning the darkness. The guards were supposed to be the ones in control, but there was a crack in their perfect system, a crack that Saracal had found. She wasn't supposed to be here, neither was Eli. The prison was designed to break the spirit of anyone who dared to challenge the Union's doctrine. But Saracal had spent years, decades even, studying the system, memorizing its routines, and learning the guards' patterns. She had studied them as much as she had studied history, and now she had found a way out. A low buzzing sound broke the silence. A guard was nearing, but Saracal didn't flinch. She had waited for this moment. She pressed a small button on her wristband, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum buzzed through the air. The access code she had stolen years ago flared to life. The door, once impenetrable, clicked open, just wide enough for her to slip through.
The guard paused for a split second. A hesitation. He had been trained not to question, not to think, but the look in his eyes betrayed him. A spark of doubt, a shred of humanity, made him hesitate just long enough. Without a word, Sarakal moved quickly, silently, and without hesitation. The door opened and Eli's cell door creaked as she slipped him free. His eyes, dark and haunted, met hers. "Are you ready?" she whispered. Eli's voice was hoarse, like he had forgotten how to speak, but his answer was clear. "Lead the way." The walls of the prison weren't crumbling from explosions or sabotage. No, these walls were falling because belief was slipping through the cracks, and belief, more than weapons or fire, could bring the system down. They would escape. They had to. The escape didn't go as smoothly as they had hoped. With every turn, every darkened hallway, they found themselves drawing closer to the labyrinth of tunnels under the prison. Tunnels that led out to forgotten star lanes used by smugglers and rebels. They were disguised as just 2 more prisoners lost in the system, their faces hidden by the blackened hoods of stolen uniforms. Eli's pulse quickened with each step. He knew the stakes, knew that the slightest misstep would mean recapture and a punishment worse than death. But it wasn't the fear of the Union that haunted him. It was the fear of losing Sarakal. She had already paid so much for this. Her defiance, her memories. How could she possibly continue when everything she believed in had already been broken? The smell of stale air and rusted metal filled the tunnels. The dim glow of dying lights barely illuminated the path ahead. The only sound was the steady drip of water from an unseen leak in the pipes. It was almost too quiet.
"How long?" Eli whispered. "Not far," Sarakal muttered, but her voice lacked certainty. They moved on, deeper into the forgotten infrastructure that once served as the Union's backbone. The Starlane routes they were about to use had been erased from the records. No one except the rebels remembered them. It was the only hope they had. But hope was a dangerous thing to trust. They reached their destination, a rusted, crumbling tower on the far side of a dying moon. The station had once been a haven for pirates and smugglers, but now it was little more than a carcass, abandoned and neglected. The control systems were ancient, and the power supply barely functioned. But it had one thing they needed, an old black market transmitter. "This is it?" Eli asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Sarakal smiled grimly. "It's all we have left." The tower groaned under the weight of years of disuse. A jagged silhouette against the flickering stars, it stood defiantly, as though it had outlasted the Union's attempt to erase its existence. Inside, the equipment was a patchwork of old tech, wires dangling like forgotten vines. There was no guarantee the transmitter would work, but if it did, the galaxy would hear Eli's voice. "Are we ready?" Eli asked, his gaze drifting to the transmitter. "For better or for worse," Sarakal replied. Together, they flipped the switch. Eli's fingers hovered over the console, his breath caught in his throat. The transmitter crackled to life, and a vast, uncharted silence filled the space around them. He knew what he had to do, but the weight of the moment threatened to crush him. "You feared a word." Eli's voice echoed into the cold emptiness of space, not with anger, but with calm defiance. "No army, no weapons, just truth." His words crackled over the airwaves, sent through a galaxy in turmoil. They would hear him. They would listen. Across the galaxy, translators scrambled to catch up with the speech. Eyes widened. Minds, both human and alien, stirred as his words spread. It wasn't the first time someone had challenged the Union, but it was the first time someone had done it without fire, without fury. Just truth. And that truth would echo across the stars. The reaction was swift and unexpected. In city streets, workers paused their routines, tools falling from their hands as they listened to Eli's words. In crowded space stations, students whispered his message to each other. Even soldiers, doubt creeping into their minds, hesitated. Even if it's messy, the rebels had spray painted on the walls of government buildings. It was the first sign of the rebellion spreading across the galaxy, igniting something in the hearts of those who had once been silent. Eli's message was now their rallying cry. Union officials scrambled to silence it, their systems working overtime to block the signal. But it was already too late. The message had reached too far, had touched too many. And the Union, once an unshakable force, was now facing something it couldn't control.
The cracks within the Union's foundation began to widen. High-ranking officials began to argue, their once solid unity splintering. Some defected, vanishing into the shadows, while others made dangerous deals in secret. On the borders, governors refused orders. They wouldn't quash the rebellion. They couldn't. A civil war was on the horizon, but it wasn't a war fought with weapons. It was a war fought with silence, with hesitation. Each act of rebellion, each refusal to comply, was another fracture in the Union's facade. And the cracks continued to grow. The final blow came without warning. Missiles rained down on the broadcast station, the tower shaking under the impact. Sparks flew, fire spreading through the broken equipment. The signal flickered, and then, just as it seemed all was lost, Eli's final words rang out. "You can silence me, but you can't unhear it." And then, silence. The tower collapsed, the final thread of resistance falling into oblivion. The galaxy had heard Eli's voice, and it would never forget. The galaxy mourned Eli. Monuments rose in his name, his words etched into tunnels, starports, and children's songs. His death, the presumed death, had become a symbol of defiance, of rebellion. One man, one word, and the Union would never be the same again. But the galaxy knew the truth, even if the Union tried to erase it. Eli was not gone. His message would live on, forever. The remnants of Zerthak's pen lay scattered across the barren landscape, its walls once towering and formidable, now crumbling like sand through outstretched fingers. The faintest winds whispered between the jagged ruins, carrying the faint echoes of the rebellion's last breaths. The broadcast tower, once a beacon of hope, now lay silent, its signal cut off by an unseen hand. But something stirred, something powerful and intangible, threading its way through the cracks in the Union's iron grip. Sarah Call stood in the shadows of the collapsed prison, her skin scarred, her soul weary. Her eyes reflected the ruined prison in front of her, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a canvas for something far greater. The voices of the fallen weren't silent. They hummed in the air like a distant song, impossible to ignore. She could hear their whispers, the words that had been spoken in the darkest corners of the prison. They remember him. They remember the one who dared speak, the one who sparked everything. From the ashes of the prison, a quiet power began to rise. It wasn't from the weapons or the fleets that had failed in their attempts to crush the rebellion. No, it came from the memory of one man, a man whose words had shattered the Union's walls, not with force, but with truth. And those words were not gone. They echoed, growing louder with each passing day, reverberating through the sectors. And in these whispers, a movement began to form, one not of fear, but of the simple, undeniable power of belief.
Sarah Cal moved through the hidden corridors of a forgotten colony, her footsteps soft yet determined. The war had left scars on her body, but the deepest wounds were etched into her spirit. The leaders, the rebels, the thinkers, they were scattered now, their voices lost to time. But not her.
A room full of exiles and refugees sat in silence, watching her enter. Their eyes were tired, distrustful, but when she raised her hand, they listened. "We rise," she began, her voice steady but laced with an intensity that rang clear in the room. "We rise, not through fire or blood, but through words. And those words will be the foundation of something greater." Saracal had seen the depths of the Union's cruelty, but she had also seen the spark of hope in those who had listened to Eli's final message. She had listened too, and she knew that the time for silence was over. The survivors, hardened by years of oppression, began to rally. Under her banner, the Free Worlds Accord was born, a coalition of thinkers, dreamers, and those who would witness the impossible. They were scattered, broken, and alone, but together they were unstoppable. The rebellion had begun, not in a single strike, but in a whisper. And from that whisper, a roar would grow. Earth, once seen as a speck of dust in the vast galaxy, now burned brighter than any star. The Union had dismissed humanity as primitive, unworthy of anything beyond exploitation. But they had underestimated one thing: the human capacity for choice. When the first messages began to arrive from Earth, they were not filled with demands for weapons or trade agreements. They were filled with something far more powerful: truth. Earth had lived through oppression, through the silence of those who had tried to snuff out their voices, and now they were speaking. Alien civilizations, once indifferent, began to listen. At first, it was cautious, questions, concerns, a sort of hesitant curiosity. But as they listened, they saw the truth. The humans had something they lacked: not power, not technology, but choice. A willingness to stand against the overwhelming forces that sought to control them. It was something the galaxy had forgotten: the power of defiance. Earth became a symbol, not of weakness, but of resilience. And as the stars aligned, a new age began, one built on truth, not fear. The collapse of the Union didn't lead to chaos. It led to something unexpected. Without the iron grip of a single oppressive force holding everything together, new diplomatic networks began to rise. But these weren't built on fear or manipulation. They were built on shared ideals, rebellion, cultural honesty, and decentralized power. As the Union faltered, former colonies and planets once oppressed began to seek their own path. They didn't want to be another cog in a grand failing machine. They wanted to stand on their own, and to do so, they needed something the Union had never allowed: freedom. The Free Worlds Accord began to take shape, slowly at first, like threads in the fabric of a new order. Governments and communities started to unite, not because they feared the fall of the Union, but because they believed in something greater, in trust, in solidarity,
In the strength of diversity. It wasn't just the end of an empire, it was the birth of a new era. Eli's face had long since faded from memory, his image lost in the vast expanse of time. But his words lived on. They became sacred, revered. They were more than just the cries of a man at the end of his life. They were a call to action, a message to the galaxy. On every planet, in every language, his speeches were translated, adapted, and shared. His words found their way into the streets, on orbital stations, on derelict ships, in hidden temples, on forgotten moons. His message remained: speak, even if it's messy. One word can change everything. His words had become symbols, graffiti on starports, verses in the underground resistance. They weren't just quotes. They were a way of life, a banner under which countless voices had rallied. Eli may have been silenced, but his message was alive. And with every echo, it grew stronger. Across the galaxy, the story of Earth's rebellion became more than just a tale of resistance. It became a prophecy. In alien classrooms, students studied the rise of humanity like ancient texts.
They marveled at the Earth's ability to fight with nothing but words, to break the shackles of oppression with nothing more than truth. In government halls, leaders began to quote Eli's speeches. His message was woven into the laws of newly formed coalitions, a guiding light for a new era. They didn't just see the power of humanity's fight, they saw their own failures reflected in the galaxy's struggle. And they knew that the time for change was now. In hidden corners, far from the prying eyes of those who once sought to control, the resistance brewed. But this time, it wasn't in whispers. It was in song. It was in every corner of every world that longed for freedom. The galaxy was awake, and the message was clear. The future was listening, and it would never be the same again. Far beyond the bustling core of galactic civilization, where the glittering lights of the known universe seemed to fade into nothingness, there was a forgotten farming world. Its surface was scarred, not from war, but from years of neglect and isolation. The crops still grew, but the tools, the machines, the very essence of the world's once proud past lay abandoned. Beneath a rusted console in a decaying shed, an alien child knelt. Her green skin was smudged with dust, and her large amber eyes flickered with curiosity. She had been raised in this world of silence, where the stars were just distant lights and history was a forgotten myth. But as her small fingers brushed over the worn-out console, something stirred. A flicker, a soft hum, as if the very air around her responded. Her heart raced as the screen flickered to life. The glow illuminated her innocent face. The rusted console groaned in protest as a file, long buried, slowly revealed itself. It was old, too old, a relic, hidden and lost in time. But the child didn't know what it was, only that it was important. With trembling fingers, she activated it, and the screen came to life, the encrypted files unlocking in a burst of static. The static faded, and in its place, a voice emerged, calm, steady, and powerful, though the sound was cracked and worn by time. If you're hearing this, you're already free. Now go help someone else. The voice wasn't familiar, but it was deep, laden with meaning. It was a message meant for someone far away, yet somehow it felt as though it had been meant just for her. The child's confusion rippled through her thoughts. She didn't know about the war, about the Union or the rebellion that had torn apart entire civilizations. But the words seemed to ignite something inside her. They weren't just words, they were a call. Her small hands gripped the console, her mind racing. She didn't understand all the details, but the voice spoke of freedom. A path carved through darkness. Something stirred deep within her. A quiet yearning, an urge to do something more. What was this? In the silence that followed, the message hung in the air, heavy with the weight of possibility. She didn't know what to do next, but she felt that somehow she had been chosen to listen. The voice was gone now, but its echo remained, calling to her, urging her to take the next step. The child stood, her gaze lifting to the heavens. The sky was vast, unbroken, stretching endlessly above her. The stars blinked softly, scattered across the dark canvas of the universe. The satellites, once tools of oppression, once symbols of a distant empire, now hung silently in the expanse, their purpose long lost. The wind swept through the fields, the grass whispering as it bent under the weight of a new dawn. There were no guards here, no walls, no looming figures watching her every move. There was only freedom, the kind of freedom she had never known existed, a freedom born not from power, but from choice. She smiled, her heart light with a strange understanding. She hadn't known it before, but now she did. Someone had walked this path before her. Someone had lit the way. And now it was her turn to continue. The stars seemed brighter now, not just distant dots in the sky, but beacons guiding her forward. And with that, the child took her first step into the unknown, no longer afraid. The sky, once silent, now sang with the promise of a new beginning,